Hi Hope City, it's Phil here. Today I want to introduce you to the contemplative practice of gratitude. See, gratitude is one of my favorite spiritual practices because of its simplicity. Gratitude is so simple that even little children can get in on it. I love watching kids pray and thank God for things like cookies or things like ice cream and grandma and grandpa. And gratitude is amazingly simple. Even children get it. It's something that, we all kind of understand in terms of what to do and how to do it. And yet at the same time, gratitude is one of the most overlooked spiritual practices. Maybe because of its simplicity, or maybe because as we get older, we tend to take things for granted and we kind of get into the habit of complaining instead of giving thanks. You see, while gratitude is simple and while gratitude is overlooked, it remains one of the most powerful spiritual practices because it has the ability, this unique ability, to shape us into truly happy people. Gordon Smith, in his book, A Holy Meal, says it like this: a simple but powerful principle of the spiritual life is that thankful people are happy people. Let me read that again. He says, a simple but powerful principle of the spiritual life is that thankful people are happy people. I want you to notice that he doesn't say that beautiful people are happy people, or that wealthy people are happy people, or even that healthy people are happy people, or successful people are happy people, or that powerful people are happy people. No, this is what he says. He says that thankful people are happy people. Grateful people are happy people. A while back there was this study that was done to determine who the happiest people on earth are. And in this study, they included people from all walks of life, from all sorts of different professions, different nationalities, different cultures. And the researchers, what they used is they used MRI to scan the parts of our brains that light up when we're actually happy. And in the end, the researchers were really surprised with the results. They were surprised at who the happiest people on earth were. Because what they found were there's these Benedictine monks who were amongst the happiest people in the world. These are monks who have taken vows of poverty, vows of chastity, vows of obedience. These were monks who have taken vows of stability, which means that they will spend their entire lives with the same community at the same monastery. They're not going to move around. If they have a disagreement, they don't get to just move. Just to recap, these guys don't own anything. They aren't married. They're not having sex. And they've given up everything. They've given up their autonomy. They've given up their freedom in ways that you and I don't understand. And yet here are some of the happiest people on earth. How can it be? Well, you see, in his TED Talk, the Benedictine monk David Stendhal Ras says this about happiness. It's not joy that makes us grateful. It is gratitude that makes us joyful. Let me say it again. It's not joy that makes us grateful. It's gratitude that makes us joyful. You see, we usually assume that if we have more good things happen to us than bad things, right? Then you will be joyful. Or that if life's positives kind of outweigh the negatives, then you will experience joy. And then if we have this joy then causes us to be grateful. But what this Benedictine monk does is he pushes back on that. He says it actually works in the opposite direction. It's our gratitude that makes us joyful. We usually assume that if we have more good things that happen to us than bad things, that then you will be joyful. That if life's positives outweigh the negatives, then you will experience joy. And then it's this joy that causes us to be grateful, right? Rather than, what this monk is saying, it's this gratitude that causes us to be joyful. Sometimes we even assume the opposite, though, in the sense that if the negatives outweigh the positives, then we will experience, misery or disappointment, envy and anger. But you and I know that this whole equation is not that simple. Our minds have a habit of focusing on the negatives. I mean, we can have a whole bunch of good things happen to us, and then one kind of negative thing, occurs, and we just get fixated on that. That just becomes the only thing that our minds can kind of think about. Our minds have this habit of focusing on the negative, on what's wrong, on what's not happening, on what we're missing, rather than all the good things that we have right in front of us. I mean, it's easy to be miserable, and yet it takes practice, it takes work to actually be joyful. And it's into that I want to tell you that there's something we need to know about these Benedictine monks and the nuns. You see, they memorize all 150 Psalms of the Bible. And then they pray out these Psalms on a weekly cycle. You see, many of these Psalms are filled with thanksgiving. It's as if these monks, these Benedictine monks and nuns, involve themselves in training themselves in the practice of giving thanks, in the practice of gratitude. You see, gratitude, giving thanks, I think it's a skill that we learn. And like any skill, it requires practice. The result of this practice, though, is growing joy. And to be honest with you, I can't think of a more appropriate skill for us to learn as we kind of approach this 1-year mark of this pandemic. I think if we're going to make it through COVID and not let our circumstances steal our joy, we need to learn how to practice gratitude. You see, God not only wants us to experience emotional joy, we need that in order to get through tough times, but He wants us to experience His very presence. You see, gratitude is deeply rooted, not just in the emotional, but in the spiritual. And that's because gratitude, if we look at it from a biblical point of view, gratitude is a doorway into God's very presence. Throughout Scripture, we have this invitation of the people of God just to give thanks. Let's have a look at Psalm 100. I think we read it in our micro churches earlier, but allow me to read it once more. It reads, "Shout for joy to the Lord, all the earth. Worship the Lord with gladness. Come before Him with joyful songs. Know that the Lord is God. It is He who made us, and we are His. We are His people, the sheep of His pasture. Enter His gates with thanksgiving and His courts with praise. Give thanks to Him and praise His name. For the Lord is good, and His love endures forever. His faithfulness continues through all generations." This psalm was written for worshipers who would come to the temple in Jerusalem to worship and to praise God. And the image that we have in this psalm is that as the worshipers physically enter the temple, as they come into the house of God, and as they draw nearer to God with each step deeper and deeper into the temple, they would not only draw nearer to God physically, but spiritually through their thanksgiving and their praise, they would draw nearer to Him spiritually into His presence. That through their praise and through their thanksgiving, they would experience God's presence more and more. So it is that when we give thanks to God, when we practice gratitude, our hearts begin to turn. Our hearts begin to turn not only towards the gifts that He gives, but towards Him as the giver. You see, when we give thanks to God, we find that God feels nearer to us. Gratitude is this active practice. Gratitude is not about giving thanks only in response to the good things that happen. You see, in Jesus' day, the devout Jews believed that our hearts could be trained in gratitude. So they would orient their lives around this practice called the 18 benedictions. Benediction literally means good word. So when devout Jews got up in the morning, they would thank God for 18 things. At noon, they would pause once again and thank God for another 18 things. And then in the evening, they would thank God for still yet another 18 things. And if you're keeping track, that's 54 things a day. They did this because they believed that our hearts could be trained in gratitude and transformed by God's presence as we give thanks. I don't know about you, but giving thanks for 18 things three times a day, it sounds pretty overwhelming. And I'm not saying that this is the spiritual practice that we need to try, Hope City. I don't think we're there yet. But here's some good news, all right? The psychologists at Harvard, they found that we can actually train our brains to become more grateful by setting aside just 5 minutes a day for practicing gratitude. You see, in this 1-week study, people were asked to take 5 minutes a day, at the same time every day, to write down 3 things they were thankful for. They didn't have to be big things, but they had to be concrete and specific. Let me give you an example. An example of something that we don't want to write down, because it's not concrete, it's not specific, is, I'm grateful for food, right? But something concrete and something specific would be, if I just had homemade spaghetti and meatballs, I would write, I'm grateful for, my wife's cooking because she made my favorite meal, spaghetti and meatballs, something more concrete, something specific. Or instead of saying, I'm just grateful for exercise, be like, I'm grateful for the walk that I was able to go on with my kids, something more specific, right? You see, this is what they did, and they practiced this for about a month. And the researchers, at the end of this 1 month, they followed up, and they found that those who practiced gratitude, including those who even stopped the exercise at 1 week, they found that these people were happier, they were less depressed. And in fact, after 3 months, those who were part of just the 1 week experiment were still more joyful and content. What's even more amazing, 6 months down the line, these individuals who participated in the 1 week experiment were still happier, still less anxious, and were less depressed. And what the researchers hypothesized is that the simple practice of just writing down 3 items of thanks over the course of a week somehow primed the participants to search for the good in their lives. What they're saying is that practicing gratitude changes us to look for the good that God puts in our lives, the good that we so easily overlook or take for granted. You see, gratitude, or the practice of gratitude, primes us to search for this good in our lives. It's like when Grace and I first started thinking of getting a dog for the family. Before we started looking or even thinking about a dog, we hardly noticed the dogs in our neighborhood. But once we started doing research and once we actually started considering the possibilities of getting a puppy, we realized that everywhere we looked, we saw dogs. And it wasn't like we lived in a different neighborhood and we had different neighbors or dogs moved into the neighborhood or anything like that. It wasn't that. It's just that we simply saw dogs everywhere because our minds were now primed to see them. And it's the same with gratitude. When we train our minds to give thanks, it's not like all of a sudden more good things happen in our lives. Rather, our minds are now primed to notice the good things that God has already placed all around us day in and day out. And so because of this, we become more grateful. And as a result of becoming more grateful, we become more joyful and we become more content, even though nothing around us may have actually changed. Here's the invitation that I want to invite us into, Hope City. That this week, I want to invite you to set aside 5 minutes just to reflect and then to write down 3 things that you want to thank God for. See if we can do this for 7 days, just a week. And I wonder if you find this helpful, that maybe you can stretch it to maybe a month or so. But consider this, if you were to practice this over the course of a year, this works out to roughly 1,095 gifts from God a year that you're noticing. And I wonder how that would shape the way that you see life and the way that you see God and the way that you experience him and the way that you relate with him. You know, Hope City, I know that COVID has been difficult for us. And, you know, I'm filming this in my garage and it's like 7 degrees outside. A lot of things have changed. I think one of the things we miss is just being able to meet together, see each other, share meals. A lot of things have been put on hold this year. But I want to encourage you because I think God is still present and still blessing you, still loving you. And I want us to experience those things rather than just notice the things that we don't have because of the pandemic. I want us to continue to grow in experiencing God, experiencing his love, and knowing the joy that he gives us. And I think that happens not just through, passively waiting for good things to happen to us. It happens as we train ourselves to look for the good, to be grateful. All right, Hope City, I hope you have an amazing time in your micro churches. I will see you soon. Really looking forward to next week when we're going to try our first live service together. Hope that as many of us can gather, even though it's online. All right, take care, Hope City.